They thought he was just another lost black teenager on trial for a crime he didn't understand. But the moment Jalen Dawson opened his mouth, the entire courtroom forgot how to breathe. In the heart of Los Angeles, inside a courthouse drenched in the smell of old wood and stale power, a storm was quietly brewing. The defendant's table seemed too large for him, a 19-year-old with his hands tucked into his hoodie pockets, chin raised just enough to say, "I'm not afraid of you." His name was whispered in the gallery. Jalen Dawson, the car thief. The prosecution had already won, in their heads. The judge had already decided, in his smirk. And yet, Jalen stood there, unmoving, a calm center in a sea of doubt. Not because he was clueless, not because he was scared, but because he knew something none of them expected. The game they were playing? He had been watching it his entire life. And today, he wasn't just going to play it. He was going to beat them at it. Judge Walter Grayson leaned back in his oversized leather chair, the weight of his robe pressing against his shoulders like the authority he wore so easily. His gavel sat untouched beside him, a symbol he rarely needed to lift because in this courtroom, his word was law long before the verdict. He peered down at Jalen over the rim of his glasses, lips twisting into a smirk so slight it barely qualified as a smile. "Let's make this quick," he sighed, flipping open the case file. "I've got a tea time at 2. The courtroom chuckled quietly, an inside joke that didn't need explaining. Even the bailiff cracked a grin. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, allowed himself a full-throated laugh. Only one person wasn't laughing, Jalen Dawson. He stood beside the defense table still, hands in his pockets, hoodie framing his sharp features. His brown eyes didn't waver from the judge. He didn't flinch at the laughter. He didn't shrink under the weight of expectation. Instead, he looked at Grayson with the calm patience of someone who had already seen this game played 100 times before. But this time, he wasn't here to play. He was here to win. "Your Honor," Carrington began, rising with the smooth confidence of a man rehearsing the same victory speech he'd delivered countless times. "The state's case is simple. The defendant was caught fleeing in a stolen vehicle. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. We have Officer Ruiz's sworn testimony placing him behind the wheel. I'll let the facts speak for themselves." The judge nodded approvingly. "Sounds straightforward enough." The gallery murmured in agreement, parents holding their children a little closer, reporters jotting down their headlines. A woman in the front row shook her head with quiet disappointment. Just another kid throwing his life away. Carrington smiled, turning to the jury box. "The defense may try to paint him as misunderstood, a victim of circumstance. But let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" Laughter rippled again. Even the jurors cracked polite smiles. Every brick in the wall around Jalen felt solid, airtight, impenetrable. And yet standing there, Jalen's lips curved ever so slightly. They didn't see it. Not yet. But the first crack had already formed. Carrington returned to his seat with the satisfaction of a man who believed the chessboard was his. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "Defense?" he prompted. Lisa Thornton, the public defender assigned to Jalen, rose uncertainly. Her hands trembled around the edges of her file. "Your Honor," she began. But Jalen gently touched her arm. She froze, glancing at him. He shook his head. Calm, controlled, quietly powerful. And then he stepped forward. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor," the room gasped. Grayson lowered his glasses. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself," Jalen repeated, his voice steady, unwavering. A beat of silence. Then Carrington's laughter burst through the courtroom again. "Oh, this is rich," he sneered. "Kid wants to play lawyer." But no one laughed. When Jalen took another step forward, his shoulders squared, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. Because somehow in that single step, the air shifted. It wasn't just a teenager standing at the defense table anymore. It was something more dangerous, a mind that knew exactly what it was walking into, and exactly how to walk out. A heavy silence settled over the courtroom, the kind that presses into your skin, wrapping around your ribs. Jalen stood in its center, unbothered, his hands slipping from his pockets at last. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady as a metronome. "Before we proceed, I'd like to clarify something with the prosecution." Grayson raised an eyebrow, bemused. "Go ahead." Jalen turned slowly to Carrington, his gaze piercing. "You stated that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel of the stolen vehicle. That's correct?" Carrington leaned back, in his chair, smug. "That's right, it's in his sworn statement." Jalen nodded once. "And that statement is the foundation of your timeline? That Officer Ruiz witnessed me driving the car before the arrest?" "Exactly." The audience murmured quietly, sensing something beneath the calm. Judge Grayson yawned. "We've established that. What's your point?" Jalen took a deliberate step forward, letting the weight of the moment expand. "Your Honor, I move to strike Officer Ruiz's testimony from the record." Grayson straightened. "On what grounds?" Jalen's lips curved into a quiet, razor-sharp smile. "Because Officer Ruiz wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A ripple shot through the courtroom like an electric current. Carrington stiffened. "What are you talking about?" he barked. Jalen's voice stayed measured, unflinching. "I request the court to subpoena Officer Ruiz's GPS logs for that night. His location history will confirm he wasn't anywhere near the pursuit when it started." He paused, letting the implications hang in the air. Because if he wasn't there, then he couldn't have seen what he claimed to see. The gallery erupted in whispers. Even the stenographer paused, glancing up from her keyboard. Grayson's amused expression dissolved into something harder. "Prosecution?" he asked, tone clipped. Carrington hesitated, just a second too long. That second mattered. It echoed through the jury box, through the benches. It smelled like uncertainty. We have no objection to verifying the officer's logs," Carrington finally said, though his jaw clenched. Jalen nodded, serene. "Interesting." The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. Carrington shuffled his papers. "Regardless," he pressed, voice tightening, "the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen car. That's indisputable physical evidence." Jalen tilted his head, studying the jury. "Let's talk about that." He approached the jury, box each step deliberate. "The prosecution wants you to believe that fingerprints equal guilt. That because my prints are on the wheel I must have stolen the car. That's their story." He paused. "But let's think about this logically." He smiled faintly, almost conspiratorial. "Say you walk into a store. You try on a jacket, you zip it up, put your hands in the pockets, then you put it back and leave. Hours later someone steals that jacket. When the police find your fingerprints on it, does that make you a thief?" A juror furrowed his brow. Another shifted uncomfortably. "The car in question?" Jalen continued. "It was parked outside a 7-Eleven earlier that evening. I was inside that store with 3 friends. When we left, I leaned against the car. I even opened the door. It was unlocked." He shrugged lightly. "Didn't drive it. Didn't take anything. Just a dumb moment of curiosity." He let the confession land, soft but undeniable, then sharpened, his voice like a blade. "Does touching something make you a criminal?" The question slid across the room like a challenge. Carrington's smirk had faded. "And while we're here," Jalen added, turning back to Grayson, "was the forensic analyst who processed those fingerprints called to testify?" Grayson blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at Carrington. Carrington hesitated, throat working. "No." Jalen's smile deepened. "So no chance for me to cross-examine? No questions about chain of custody? No confirmation of lab procedures?" Carrington's silence said it all. Grayson exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. The easy win was slipping through his fingers and he knew it. But Jalen wasn't finished, not even close. The silence hanging in the courtroom was different now. Not heavy with boredom or smugness, but electrified. A quiet anticipation had settled over every row, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Jalen stepped back from the jury box, letting his gaze sweep across the faces turned toward him. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "I'd like to introduce additional evidence into the record." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "What evidence?" Jalen reached into the slim folder he'd carried with him since the trial began. He pulled out a printed transcript, his fingers steady. "A statement from the registered owner of the stolen vehicle, Mr. Raymond Whitaker." Carrington's head snapped up. "Objection! That statement wasn't submitted in discovery." Jalen held up the document. "Actually, Your Honor, it was included in the original police report. Page 7, bottom paragraph." He tapped it. "The prosecution simply chose not to mention it." Carrington's face reddened, his lips pressing into a tight line. Grayson leaned forward. "Read it." Jalen cleared his throat, then read aloud, voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy they arrested. I saw the kid. He was white." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jurors shifted in their seats. In the gallery, someone whispered, "Wait, what?" Jalen lowered the paper, letting the words settle like dust. "That's the owner's sworn statement, Your Honor. Yet the prosecution proceeded against me despite knowing I didn't match the description of the actual suspect." Carrington stumbled forward. "Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended near the abandoned vehicle. His fingerprints were on the wheel." Jalen turned, eyes sharp as glass. "Yes, I was walking home from the store with my friends. The car had already been ditched. I wasn't in it. I wasn't near it. The officers found a black kid in the vicinity and decided that was close enough." A hush fell again. This wasn't just a legal argument anymore. It was something deeper. He could feel the weight of it pressing into the walls, reverberating under the marble floor. Judge Grayson rubbed his jaw, staring hard at Carrington. "Counselor, why wasn't this statement presented in your case file?" Carrington's mouth opened, but no words came. Jalen's voice dropped lower, quieter, but somehow more powerful for it. The prosecution ignored evidence that didn't fit their narrative. The arresting officer omitted this statement from his testimony. And now they expect this jury to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that I'm guilty? He paused. Beyond a reasonable doubt or beyond a convenient shortcut? Grayson's face tightened. He looked older in that moment. Tired. Like a man seeing cracks in a system he thought was solid stone. "Your Honor," Jalen continued, "I respectfully request a motion to dismiss all charges based on prosecutorial misconduct, evidentiary suppression, and failure to present exculpatory evidence." Gasps. Murmurs. The jury leaned forward, hanging on every word. Carrington's papers rustled violently as he flipped through them, desperation bleeding into his movements. "This is irrelevant. He was found near the car." "No," Jalen interrupted, his voice steel now. "It's not irrelevant when the state's entire case is built on lies, omission, and prejudice." He turned again to the jury. "Look at me, really look. Do I match the description of the suspect the owner saw? Or do I just match the profile the officers were looking for?" The question hit like a hammer. Faces shifted. Someone on the back bench wiped away tears. Carrington's defenses were crumbling. His polished veneer cracked, and across the bench Judge Grayson sat very still, his hands folded, his gaze unreadable. But behind those glasses, something had changed. Respect, recognition, regret. Jalen let out a slow breath. "This isn't just about me. This is about how easy it is to assume, to skip steps, to close a case instead of solve one." He stepped back, lifting the transcript again. I've spent years watching this system work. I thought I understood it. But standing here, now I realize it was never designed for me to win. And yet, here he was, standing, fighting. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. They were listening. A silence deeper than any before swallowed the room. Even the murmurs had faded now, replaced by something heavier, something like collective reckoning. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on Jalen as if seeing him for the first time. "The court will take a brief recess," he announced, his voice low. The gavel tapped once. Not the sharp bang of authority, more like a reluctant punctuation. As the jury filed out, their glances lingered on Jalen. Not pitying, not dismissive, but curious, questioning. Carrington gathered his papers stiffly, jaw clenched. Across the aisle, the bailiff gave Jalen a long, unreadable look before turning away, but Jalen didn't move. He stood in the same spot, hands in his pockets again, his shoulders relaxed despite the storm he'd stirred. Lisa Thornton approached him quietly. "You didn't have to go this far," she murmured. "You're risking contempt." He turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. "If I don't go this far, nothing changes," her mouth pressed into a thin line. "They're going to push back, hard." "I know." She hesitated, then touched his arm gently. "I'm proud of you." And with that, she left him alone at the defense table, surrounded by empty chairs and discarded notes. Outside the windows, clouds gathered over downtown Los Angeles. The light shifted, shadows creeping across the courtroom floor. When the judge returned, he didn't sit immediately. He stood at the bench, both hands gripping its edge. "Counsel," he addressed Carrington, "the defense has raised serious concerns about procedural integrity." Carrington cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the state maintains the strength of its case, but we're willing to pause proceedings pending review of the officer's GPS logs and the omitted statement." Jalen spoke before Grayson could respond. "Your Honor, permission to approach?" Grayson raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Jalen walked forward, slow and deliberate, his every step echoing in the cavernous chamber. He stopped before the bench, looking the judge square in the eye. "I don't want a delay," he said quietly. "I want accountability, right now." Grayson frowned. "Mr. Dawson, you're not in a position—" "With respect, Your Honor," Jalen cut in, his voice firm. "This courtroom has a position. This bench has a position. And for too long, it's been comfortable looking the other way." A ripple of discomfort moved through the gallery. Jalen took a breath, his tone softening. "But today, you can't look away. Not from me. Not from the truth. Not from what this case really says about the system." Grayson's lips pressed together. "Careful, Mr. Dawson." Jalen's smile returned, tired but unyielding. "Careful stopped working a long time ago." Carrington slammed his folder shut. "Your Honor, I move to strike these statements from the record." "No." The single word silenced Carrington. It hadn't come from Jalen. It had come from Grayson. The judge sank slowly into his chair, his gaze heavy with a weight neither defense nor prosecution could touch. "Let him finish." Carrington's mouth snapped shut. Jalen turned back to the jury even though they were still out. "Every day people come into this room hoping for fairness, hoping someone's paying attention. But most days they're just files in a stack, faces in a crowd." He faced Grayson again. "You told me earlier this wasn't a debate club, that this was real life. Well, here's real life. The system almost condemned an innocent man today because it was easier to believe a stereotype than check the facts." His voice grew quieter, sharper. "And if I hadn't known the law, if I hadn't grown up with a mother who taught me how to fight, if I hadn't spoken up, this system would have swallowed me whole." Grayson rubbed his temple again, visibly conflicted. Jalen's jaw set. "So no, I don't want a delay, I want a dismissal." And I want that dismissal to be a message that maybe, just maybe, someone was paying attention today. A long silence followed. Then Grayson leaned forward. Counselor Carrington? Carrington swallowed hard. The state withdraws the charges. Gasps. A tremor of reaction swept through the courtroom. But Jalen didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply nodded once, like a chess player acknowledging a game well played. Outside, the clouds broke, spilling light across the marble floor. But inside something bigger had broken. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the echoes remained. Whispers, footsteps, the soft creak of chairs returning upright. Jalen stood by the defense table, alone now, his hands resting on the worn wood. For a moment, he simply breathed, taking in the quiet after the storm. Lisa Thornton approached again, her smile small but shining with pride. "You did it," she said softly. Jalen glanced at her, the corners of his lips lifting just a fraction. "No," he corrected gently. "We did." She shook her head, emotion thickening her voice. "No, Jalen. That was all you." Behind them, Judge Grayson gathered his paper slowly. His usual efficiency was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar stillness. He looked up once, his gaze lingering on Jalen, unreadable, before turning away. As he disappeared into his chambers, the weight of the moment hung in the air like a final verdict. Outside the courtroom, the hall had transformed into a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouting reporters, microphones thrust forward, questions flying fast. "Jalen, did you expect the dismissal? How did you know about the missing statement? Do you plan to sue the department? Are you going to law school?" Jalen paused at the threshold, eyes scanning the chaos. Then he pulled up his hoodie, tucking his face into its shadow, and stepped forward, not to answer, but to walk through. They followed anyway, their voices chasing him down the marble steps. But waiting at the bottom was Denise Dawson. She stood with her arms crossed, her face a complex map of pride, worry, and exhaustion. "Boy," she murmured as he approached, "you about gave me a heart attack today." Jalen stopped in front of her, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. "Had to, Ma." Her mouth twitched, a reluctant smile breaking through. "I raised a stubborn one. You raised a fighter." She exhaled, her shoulders lowering, and wrapped him in a tight embrace. "Don't forget why you're fighting." "I won't." She held him a moment longer, then pulled back, her eyes shining. "They're going to keep coming for you, you know." "I know. And you're going to keep standing." He nodded. "Every time." Across the street, Judge Grayson stood, by his car, watching. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression unreadable but no longer smug. Something closer to contemplative. Their eyes met across the distance. A silent acknowledgement. Then Grayson got into his car and drove away, leaving behind more than just a parking space. Denise looked toward the reporters still gathered at the steps. "You want to talk to them?" Jalen shook his head. "Not yet." "What, then?" He turned his gaze upward, watching a sliver of blue sky appear between clouds. "I'm going to work." She raised an eyebrow. "Work? Not just for me, Ma." He turned back to her, his voice steady, quiet but fierce. "For everyone who never got this chance. For the ones nobody listened to. For the ones who couldn't speak loud enough." A long pause. Then she nodded slowly. "That's my boy." Together, they walked away from the courthouse steps, past the cameras, past the headlines already being written, into a future still unwritten. And somewhere behind them, the courthouse doors swung closed, not as an end, but as a beginning. The apartment was quiet that evening. Jalen sat at the small kitchen table, a steaming mug of coffee between his hands, untouched. Denise moved around him, humming faintly, as she packed away leftovers. The TV played softly in the background, another news anchor recapping the day's events. A surprising courtroom victory today for 19-year-old Jalen Dawson, accused of grand theft auto. The words faded into static in Jalen's mind. He stared at the legal pad spread out in front of him, filled with notes, case law references, scribbled strategies. They weren't just for his trial. They were for something bigger. Denise placed a plate of food beside him. "Eat, baby," she said gently. "You haven't all day." He nodded absently, still scanning his notes. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, her chin resting on her hand. "You're not gonna let this go, are you?" He looked up at her, his eyes steady, clear. "Ma, how many kids like me don't get this chance? How many don't know the rules of the game until it's too late?" Her gaze softened. "A lot." He tapped a pen against the table. "Then I can't stop here. I can't be the exception." Denise reached across, covering his hand with hers. "You're not just an exception, Jalen, you're an answer." He swallowed hard, emotion rising unexpectedly. "I thought winning today would feel like the end, but it doesn't. That's 'cause it's not." She smiled sadly. "It's just the first round." The TV flashed a new headline. "Teen outsmarts prosecutor, judge in stunning courtroom. Twist." Denise clicked it off with the remote. They love the story now, but they won't always love it when you start telling the ugly truths. "I know. You ready for that?" Jalen leaned back in his chair, a slow breath filling his chest. "I've been ready my whole life." A knock at the door interrupted them. Denise rose cautiously, peeking through the peephole. Then she opened it. Lisa Thornton stood in the hall, holding a manila envelope. She looked exhausted but satisfied. "I thought you'd want this," she said, handing it to Jalen. He opened it to find copies of the court transcript, case files, evidence reports. "Why'd you bring these?" Lisa smiled faintly. "Because they're going to ask you to speak. Colleges, legal aid groups, community centers, people already reached out." Denise blinked in surprise. "They want him to... what?" "Tell his story. Teach others how he did it. Inspire kids who've given up." Lisa's eyes found Jalen's. "You're already bigger than this one trial, Jalen." He flipped through the papers, feeling the weight of each word printed there. His name, in black and white. His fight immortalized in legal language. "I'm not done learning," he murmured. Lisa chuckled. "Nobody ever is, but you're already teaching, whether you like it or not." Denise placed a hand on his shoulder. "You got a gift, baby, but don't forget, you're more than a headline." Jalen folded the papers carefully, setting them beside his notes. "I know." Outside the window, the city stretched into the night, its lights blinking like quiet beacons. Somewhere out there were other kids facing court stacked against them, other families praying for mercy, other names waiting to be heard. "I'm gonna apply to law school," he said quietly. Denise's eyes filled, but her smile was proud. "Knew you would." Lisa raised her eyebrows. "Already got recommendations waiting. Let me know where you want to go." He nodded. "But that's just step one." Lisa tilted her head. "Step two?" He looked between them both, resolve settling into his bones. "I'm not just getting in, I'm bringing people with me." And with those words, something shifted. Not an end, but a mission taking root. The night wrapped around them like a quiet promise. And tomorrow waited, full of battles yet to be fought. The community center buzzed with low conversation as folding chairs scraped against the tile floor. Flyers were taped unevenly to the walls, reading "Know Your Rights" in bold letters. A small podium stood at the front of the room, battered but sturdy. Jalen stood behind it, staring at the empty seats slowly filling up. He could feel his pulse in his neck. He had argued in front of a judge, dismantled a prosecutor's case under pressure, But somehow, standing here, waiting for everyday people to sit down, felt harder. Lisa stepped up beside him, holding a clipboard. "It's a good turnout for a first event," she whispered. "I hope they don't expect some hero speech," Jalen muttered. Lisa smiled knowingly. "They don't want a hero, Jalen. They want a mirror." He swallowed, watching as more teens shuffled in, hoodies, backpacks, sideways glances. A few adults took seats in the back. His mother waved from the third row, pride and worry mingling in her expression. When the last folding chair creaked into place, Lisa tapped the microphone. "All right, let's get started." She stepped aside. Jalen stepped forward. The mic crackled. He looked out at them, taking in their faces. Some curious, some skeptical, some guarded, arms crossed, waiting for him to prove he belonged up there. "My name's Jalen Dawson," he began, voice steady. "You've probably heard about me, or maybe you haven't." A few murmurs. "But if you've ever felt like the system was already decided before you even walked in, then you already know my story." Silence, then a nod from a boy in the back. "I was 19 when they tried to lock me up, told me I didn't belong anywhere but a cell." His jaw tightened. "But they underestimated me, because I'd been learning their rules since I was a kid. I learned where they cut corners, where they hoped you didn't know your rights. I learned enough to make them blink first." A ripple of interest passed through the room. "But let me be real with you, knowing the law isn't enough." He scanned the room, eyes locking with one skeptical girl near the aisle. "Because even when you know it, they still hope you don't have the guts to fight back." The girl uncrossed her arms slowly. "They're counting on fear, on silence, on you thinking you're alone." He tapped the podium lightly. "But that's why I'm here, to tell you, you're not." A few heads nodded. Denise's lips curved into a small, proud smile. "You don't have to be a lawyer to fight smart. You don't have to wear a suit. You don't even have to stand in a courtroom. You just need to know enough to ask the right questions, enough to make them prove it, enough to not get steamrolled because they think you won't push back." He leaned closer to the mic, voice lowering. "And I promise you, when you make them prove it, sometimes they can't." A hum moved through the audience. Jalen straightened. "That's why this ain't just a speech. This is step one." He pointed to a stack of handouts on a side table. "We're starting a workshop every week. I'll teach you what I learned. We'll bring in speakers. We'll talk strategy. We'll talk survival." The skeptical girl raised her hand. "Why should we believe you?" Jalen met her gaze without flinching. "Because last month I stood alone in a courtroom with a system stacked against me, and I walked out free. Not because they let me, because I made them." A beat of silence. Then slowly, the girl nodded. Lisa stepped forward. "We've got sign-up sheets at the table. This is real. No grades, no tests. Just knowledge that might keep you or someone you love from losing everything." People started lining up at the table. Jalen stepped back, exhaling deeply. Lisa gave him a quiet grin. "Not bad for your first day." Jalen watched the teens scribbling their names, some hesitant, some eager. "It's not the last," he murmured. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was the true beginning. Later that night, the city was quiet, in a way that felt rare. Jalen walked alone, hands in his jacket pockets, sneakers scuffing the cracked sidewalk as streetlights blinked overhead. The flyer from tonight's event fluttered in his hand, creased and smudged but still readable. "Know your rights." He paused outside the courthouse, the same building where it had all started. It loomed in the dark, its marble columns casting long shadows. Tonight it didn't look like a fortress. It looked smaller. He stood there a long moment, feeling the weight of everything he'd carried. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Lisa. "We already have 23 people signed up for next week. They're asking what's next." He smiled faintly, typing back, "Tell them, this was never just about me." A car honked from across the street. His mother leaned out the window. "You coming, or am I leaving you for the pigeons?" Jalen chuckled, jogging over. "I'm coming, Ma." As he slid into the passenger seat, Denise glanced at him sideways. "You know this path's not gonna get easier, right?" "I know," he said quietly. "But it's the right one." She nodded, her hands tightening on the wheel. "Then let's get you ready for it." The ride home was quiet, comfortable, but Jalen's mind wasn't resting. Every face he'd seen tonight replayed in his head. The kid in the back row with fire in his eyes, the skeptical girl who finally nodded, the quiet ones who hadn't spoken but hadn't left either. They were counting on him now. The next morning, Jalen sat at the kitchen table, papers spread in front of him. Notes, case files, a blank legal pad already half filled with scribbles. He wasn't just planning workshops, he was planning something bigger. Lisa's voice echoed in his head. "They don't want a hero, they want a mirror." He'd be both, if he had to, across. The table, Denise set down a mug of coffee. "What are you writing now?" "A curriculum," Jalen answered, tapping his pen against the pad. "And maybe an outline for a podcast, a YouTube channel. I want this to go beyond one room." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not aiming small, huh?" He grinned. "Was never the plan." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. "Good. Because the fight's bigger than you." "I know," Jalen said, gaze steady. "That's why I'm staying in it." Hours later, he stood in front of a rented storefront, a faded sign above it reading, "For lease." Lisa walked up beside him, holding a set of keys. "It's ours. For the next year," she said. "Cheap rent, needs work, but it's a start." Jalen took the keys, feeling their weight. "Let's turn it into something that lasts." When they unlocked the door and stepped inside, the space was dusty, empty, but filled with possibility. He could already see it. Chairs arranged in a circle, posters on the wall, a place where kids could walk in scared and walk out empowered. Lisa leaned against the doorway, watching him. "Think they're ready?" Jalen glanced back at her, a quiet fire in his eyes. "Doesn't matter if they are. We're gonna be." He stepped deeper into the room, imagining the voices, the lessons, the resistance being built here one conversation at a time. Out on the street, the world kept moving. Cars passing, people hustling, sirens in the distance. But inside these walls, something new was starting. And Jalen Dawson, the kid who once stood alone in a courtroom, was no longer just defending himself. He was building an army. For the next fight. For the next Jalen. For every kid who didn't know they had a voice until someone showed them. Because sometimes the system doesn't change when you shout at it. It changes when you teach others how to fight back. And Jalen? He wasn't done fighting, he was just getting started. If this story made you feel something, if it made you question, hope, or believe, then don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Be the next voice that refuses to be silenced, because the fight for justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins with you.